AskReddit by Educational Plantor. What is a fact that you learned in grade school that has been disproven? Komodo dragon bites were deadly due to high concentrations of bacteria, not venom. Turns out that they are, in fact, venomous. Why does a big fuck off lizard need venom, too? The snakes that are as big as a Komodo don't need it, and those don't live in Indonesia where all the prey species are fun-sized snacks. I was told there's no such fish as an alligator gar when I chose it for a report. The teacher refused to let me look it up on the internet, very early at the time, and untrustworthy, or encyclopedia, would take too long. So she asked the kid in the room who was known for being into animals. He had never heard of it, so it couldn't possibly exist. I will never not be salty about this. I am still salty about Sister Catherine insisting that the 15th century started in 1500 and not 1401. I had a parent-teacher conference about that shit. It was bizarre. I was given partial credit but also had points deducted for insubordination, so it came out the same. When I was little, I was taught about the Brontosaurus, mighty long-necked plant eater of the dinosaurs. Later, I was taught that, whoops, they accidentally stuck some random bones together and there was never any such animal. Later still, I recall hearing that, oh, actually, there was a Brontosaurus after all. Or was there? To this day, I am still, as a 42-year-old man, unclear on whether or not there was ever such a thing as a Brontosaurus. The Brontosaurus story, we learned as kids that it was the wrong skull put on the skeleton and thus the mix-up was true. But scientists didn't want the name to go to waste, so they gave it to another long-necked plant eater that was discovered more recently. When I was in junior high in the mid-80s, our earth science textbooks had continental drift, and our teacher said, "Okay, so I need you to ignore all of chapter 4, or whatever it was. Plate tectonics has been the accepted theory taught in colleges for 10 years now, but K-8 textbooks haven't caught up yet." I feel like the version of plate tectonics I learned was a tiny bit garbled compared to what kids learned 10 years later, but my teacher was directly pulling from college texts and published scientific papers and distilling it down for 6th graders, so more power to her. But what did chapter 4 say? Continental drift is real, right? It's just caused by plate tectonics. Or is it a completely different theory that's been disproven? The Tastabat zones thing. For those who don't know, we used to be taught that different zones of our tongue tasted different things. One part tasted sour things, one part tasted sweet, etc. It was ridiculous and disproven by anyone who had ever eaten food, but it was still in science books. That as a kid, strangers were going to constantly offer you drugs. Thank you, DARE program. Free drugs and quicksand were two things that were supposed to be a lot more common than they ended up being. Humans are the only animals that use tools. Cow tools. Where did we end up on "You can see the Great Wall from space"? Because at different points that was both true and definitely disproven in various textbooks I had. The supposed fact was that it was the only man-made object that could be seen from space. That's certainly not true. There is no distance where you'd be able to see it but not also be able to see other man-made objects. It's very long but not particularly wide. Gum doesn't sit in your system for 7 years. Deleted. That you can see the Great Wall from space. It's long, not wide. If you can't see a highway from space, what makes you think you can see the Great Wall? Because it's called the Great Wall, not the medical wall. I remember learning that MSG, sodium glutamate, was really bad for you. It was one of those things I heard both at school and in my family, to the point where we wouldn't buy any product that had MSG in the ingredients. There have been multiple studies showing no evidence of adverse health effects from MSG. There is a subset of people that report hypersensitivity to it. But in double-blind experiments, their symptoms tend not to show up when they don't know they've eaten it. Conversely, their symptoms do show up when they think they've eaten it but haven't actually. Conclusion: MSG is literally just salt and glutamate protein, which is separately in just about everything you eat anyway. Edited missing word. Meanwhile, I bought a big bag of MSG from a Chinese supermarket last weekend so I can make all of my meals taste takeaway fresh. We were taught that Rosa Parks didn't get up from her seat because she just got tired one day, that the entire action was the spontaneous action of a lone woman. In fact, the entire thing was scripted and choreographed. While Parks was a seamstress, she was also the secretary to the president of the local NAACP chapter. She was recreating the protest done by Claudette Colvin. The NAACP wanted Parks to recreate it because Colvin was very dark-complected and a single mother. The NAACP thought Parks, who was lighter-skinned, would appeal to white audiences seeing this on TV. People think these movements just happen one day because it's a very romantic idea, that one day the people just revolt. There is always a ton of planning involved and there is a lot of politics in that planning. Because a revolt can't work without the support of a majority of people. Regardless of the source, anything on the internet was considered to not be a valid reference. But you can cheat by using the sources from a Wikipedia article. In the early 80s we were told that we would soon use the metric system in the US. Still waiting. Remember the speed limit signs with big MPH and little kph? And eventually they were going to swap size, then they just put all the old signs back. We had lessons on how to get out of quicksand at school. I have no doubt that the method is valid, but the disproven bit for me is the need to know how to get out of quicksand. It really isn't an issue. In a similar vein, we had a lot of education about stranger danger. Again, not disproven. But much more valid would have been education about how much child abuse and abduction is committed by someone known to the victim. Australia's Most Wanted had me petrified to look out the window at night. Turns out the dangerous person wasn't lurking outside waiting to get in. He was a member of my family. Fun fact, if you go to Mont Saint-Michel, Normandy, France, you may have to get out quickly. Tourists often wander into the Bay of Son to get pictures, not knowing that the sea comes back up extremely quickly. As a kid, it was said to be faster than the fastest horse. It is not. Quicksand? You can't die in it, unless you dive head first, I guess. But you can be trapped. And the tide can drown you in it. A couple of years ago they had to get tourists out using an helicopter. You had to force feed yourself 182 cups of milk a day if you wanted strong bones. I'm not saying it was presented as fact, but I definitely expected catching on fire and being given free drugs to be a much bigger part of adulthood. Tongue maps. I swore I could taste bitter all over my tongue. My classmates said I was lying. Why would I lie about that? But now I wonder, Kari, WTF were you doing? Lying, Kari. I was taught that in college you will spend all of your study time in a library reading and researching using books and reference catalogs. The internet was evil and full of lies and not a valid resource for academic research. During the first week of my PhD program, I went to the library to do some research. That was in 2000. That was the last time I did this as an academic, and I'm a professor. It's a bit sad, because the library was my favorite place growing up in the community and at school. I remember searching through the physical card catalogs. Now, I can find the books and articles I need online. Blood is blue in your veins and only turns red when you bleed BC of oxygen. I am an embalmer and often see arteries and veins up close. Veins actually do appear blue in the body. But it's just the way the red color of blood is refracted through our semi-translucent tissue. Back in my day, Pluto was still a planet. You heard about Pluto? Man, that's messed up. That carrots make your eyesight better. This was in the early 90s. When my mom found out I needed to get glasses when I was in 2nd grade, she forced me to eat a large bag of carrots. My 8-year-old self was crying eating carrots. Fast forward 15 years later and my optometrist said that 95% of your eyesight is genetic. Now I don't eat carrots because of the trauma. The food pyramid. What do you mean? Be sure to eat your 7-8 servings of spaghetti every day for optimal health. That the teachers in the next grade up will not slow down. I remember hearing that in middle school. High school teachers and college professors were super chill and helpful most of the time. We won't be walking around with a calculator in our pockets. Same with you won't be able to look up the answers whenever you want. Fast forward to now, where we all have a calculator and computer in our pockets at all time. The entire food pyramid. Edit for clarification, I'm referring to the old 90s food pyramid that has been long abandoned for unhealthy portions of unhealthy foods. That you should tilt your head back when you have a nosebleed. You actually need to pinch your nose and bend forwards. Goddamn, I'm Gen X. We learned that given then current rates of productivity, we'd all be working 3-day weeks by 2010. Without being told we'd be paid for 3-day weeks, or that our labor would be offshored to Chinese prison camps. They were right as far as productivity goes, they just didn't account for greedy companies being able to get away with stealing all of it. Just ignore the bullies and they'll go away. You can be anything you want to be when you grow up. They're only being mean because they're jealous of you. There's something wrong with being left-handed. Turns out that my mum is actually not so fat that every time she turns around it's her birthday. But when she walks by in front of the TV, do you miss an entire episode? Eggs are bad because of cholesterol. Egg yolks specifically, which they claimed the cholesterol caused heart problems. Ironically, egg yolks are supposed to be very good for your heart, because the cholesterol they cause is good cholesterol and they reduce bad cholesterol. Still to this day there are articles about them raising cholesterol though. The Coriolis force does not, in fact, cause toilets to drain counterclockwise. We were taught in 3rd grade that MLK Jr. and his family died from a bomb being thrown through the window of his home after his "I had a dream" speech. A few years later, my mom said something about how he was shot and maybe there was a bomb thrown into his home, but that wasn't how he died. I told her that's not what happened. She told me I was wrong. I looked it up. I was lied to. Pluto was a planet. Also that random people would give me free drugs. Hey, kid, wanna try some drugs? Flings open trench coat. The fact that someone will try to pressure me to smoke or do drugs often. I feel more peer pressured into drinking oat milk or not eating meat than I do doing drugs. Plenty of peer pressure for alcohol, though. Fixed amount of brain heart cells after reaching a certain age. Margarine is better for you than butter. That men have one less rib than women. Funny story. I knew a guy who did have one less rib on one side, due to an ATV wreck, he said. We were hanging out in a group and sharing random stuff, as you do when drinking as a young person, and he said how he had fewer ribs on one side. My idiot, raised Christian, ass said, dude, you're not special. Every guy has one less rib on one side. Duckles of Adam and Eve. You could have heard a pin drop a mile away, it went so quiet. Mercifully, instead of laughing, the group just took it upon themselves to educate me, and the guys had me counting all their ribs as proof. You lose cursive forever. I feel like I am the only person on this planet that still writes in cursive. That frogs don't feel pain because they don't have skin like humans do. I think the middle school science teacher who said this was just to calm down some upset kiddos during frog dissection day. The frogs were alive? Cracking your knuckles gives your arthritis. I had a teacher who would make you miss recess if he caught you cracking anything really. But especially knuckles. He found that worse than cracking your back or neck. Didn't make sense. A guy spent his whole life cracking the knuckles on just one hand to see if it got arthritic. It did not. I thank him every time I crack my knuckles without fear. Putting Aboriginal children in schools was okay at the time, I was taught, and they wanted their children to go. The Aboriginals were treated with respect and their traditions and values were protected. Canada in the 90s, more specifically my social teacher in grade 6 or 7. Pretty sure now that's not how it went down. This is what Australia pretty much did too. Took kids from their parents, forced them in schools to teach them how to be culturally European or civilized, then when old enough married them to Europeans, to breed out the black. There's diary entries from people who whiteness is a stolen generation being taken. Mothers would scream, fathers would chase after their children, parents were killed too if they cried too much or tried taking back their children. Dinosaurs are cold-blooded. I'm finding all sorts of conflicting reports on this up to even last year. Apparently the question is far from settled, but it seems established they were definitely not all cold-blooded. I'm now under the impression that we did not, in fact, have a nice friendly Thanksgiving dinner with the Native Americans. This one is actually true though. Relations between the Pilgrims and the Native American tribes were actually pretty good until King Philip's War in the 1670s. Far too many to count. Elementary school was 1970s for me, and apparently the folks that wrote our textbooks and curriculum in the 50s and 60s were entirely full of shit, high on mushrooms, and or pulling facts out of their asses. I have a children's picture dictionary from Spain in the 70s that says things like, "What you certainly can't trust is what the Negro says." I was around 8 years old, and I found that comment racist enough to think about it now and then throughout my whole life. Recently, during a visit to my parents' house, I checked the book and looked for the specific quote. Yep, I remembered correctly. In 3rd grade I raised my hand and pointed out that Antarctica is in fact a desert after the teacher said deserts are only hot. She put me in the corner desk facing the wall, legitimately saying I was just trying to make up lies and subvert her. You can't use a calculator for this lesson. You won't be walking around with one in your pocket when you're older, so you need to learn how to calculate without one. Still a valuable skill. If someone can't multiply 7x9 without a calculator, no one would think that's a positive in society vs the old-fashioned way. The Food Triangle recommended 10 to 12 servings of bread and grains a day. This is the food pyramid I remember. https://en.m.wiki.org/food_pyramid_open bracket nutrition close bracket. It was actually 6-11 servings, where one serving is counted as one slice of bread or 1/2 cup cooked rice. For example, 6 servings could look like oatmeal for breakfast, a sandwich for lunch, and a stir fry with rice for dinner. Adds up to 150 grams of carbs, 600 calories, which is only 30% of a 2000 calorie diet, not even high carb. Of course, not everyone needs to eat 2000 calories, but 6 servings of grains isn't a crazy all you can eat pasta buffet. It's really not hard to get there. If you work very hard you will make money and have a nice life.